little bit different here in Henniker. And our first guest is the congressman from the 1st District who's running for re-election. And we're calling this, sort of loosely speaking, the job interviews. We have built a really great partnership with some of our local media leaders. And we were interested in not only doing debates on campus, but we wanted to have some functions that were something different as well. So this morning is designed to be a sort of an exercise in democracy in a different way. So what we're going to do is we have a distinguished panel of media who will be asking our candidates questions on a variety of different topics. And I'm going to sort of guide things along. And it's meant to be sort of the feel of what an editorial board meeting actually is like that the newspapers do all over the state, all over the country in an election cycle. So we'll talk about topics that are of national consequence, but we'll also talk a little bit about personal motivations and what makes the candidate tick. So I'm very pleased to introduce as our first guest this morning, our 1st District Congressman, Congressman Frank Guinta. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right, so let's start with this. Why don't we just do a little bit of an opening statement, if you would, Congressman. Share with us a little bit about what's on your mind and what are maybe some of the major issues of the day and why you want this job.
Well, thank you all very much for coming. I want to thank the panelists as well and Newman College. I have served as the 1st Congressional District member for almost 2 years now, my first term. Prior to that, I served as mayor of Manchester for 2 terms, 4 years. And prior to that, I was a city alderman, a state legislator, and a small business owner. And I think we're in very, very interesting times in our nation. We have a lot of serious and legitimate issues that we've got to focus on. I think most people are concerned about jobs in the economy and how to move this country in the right direction. And there are very different approaches in how we want to accomplish those goals. But my experience as a first-term legislator is one that is full of optimism, because I do think that as the greatest nation in the world, we get it, we know what we have to do. It's a matter of trying to move the ball in that direction. My concerns aren't just about jobs and economy, it's about the existing debt levels that we have, $16 trillion, the annual deficits that we have at about $1.1 to $1.2 trillion, and the reality that we're living in right now of the amount of money we have to borrow in order to run the federal government. The reality is that our economy has not bounced back the way we want. It is a significant challenge, not just here in New Hampshire, but nationally and internationally. So I suspect that in the next term, regardless of who is the president, regardless of who is in charge of the Senate and the House in terms of party leadership, we will see a focus on economic stability, on economic reform, on tax policy reform, on financial and banking reform. Because if we don't get out of sort of the slide we're in, you'll continue to feel stagnation, and that's not good for just about anybody. So I think that's where the final weeks of the campaign will tend to focus on, and I think that's where the country is going to most decide who will be the leaders of our nation for the next 2 and 4 years.
Great. Let's get right to the panel's questions. Felice Bellman is the editor of the Concord Monitor. You may have seen her a couple of weeks ago here when we had our debate between the gubernatorial candidates. And Felice, what would you like to ask them?
Thank you so much. Congressman, New York Times yesterday editorialized that the United States should simply pack up and leave Afghanistan immediately. They argued that we won't accomplish anything more in the 2 years that President Obama says we'll stay there, and that the cost to America, including the potential lives of American soldiers, simply isn't worth the risk. Today on our front page, we have news of yet another New Hampshire soldier who lost his life in Afghanistan. Is the Times right? And if not, what is it that we're trying to accomplish in the next 2 years?
Well, in my first term, I had a chance to visit Afghanistan back in December of last year. And I got a firsthand look at the challenges for not just our warriors, but the allied troops. And really what the challenges are in the country. And I think we have to think about what is our role internationally, but what is the responsibility we have to protect our citizens? And I think this is where it really started, was the notion of ensuring there is never another terrorist attack on American soil. And the reality of the fact that you have the Haqqani network, you have Al-Qaeda, that in the winter months are right across the border in Pakistan. We know that. There's still about 50,000 different terrorists who are waiting to come back into Afghanistan and wreak havoc. And what they want to do is essentially create an environment where they can reestablish their communication systems, where they can use the drug trade in Afghanistan to fund the purchasing of their illegal guns and to go to war against America. That's a harsh reality. None of us like it. It's a different kind of war. It's not fighting another government. It's fighting almost a group of individuals that don't necessarily have a home. So I think we have a responsibility to protect our citizenry. The way I think this is going to happen is to have a small force focused on identifying terrorist activity, not just in Afghanistan, but all around the world. Now, when I visited Afghanistan, part of where I went was into the southern part of the country, the Helmand region. And what struck me is the week before, I was home for Thanksgiving. A week later, I'm in Afghanistan, meeting with generals on the ground, walking in a hallway where I saw pictures of American soldiers with dates on them. And the last date was November 28th, a week before my trip. And when we were all sitting around our Thanksgiving tables, so yes, this is real. People are losing their lives. And we can't underestimate the importance of the decisions that Congress has to make and the President has to make. But there's also a reality that we've got to do everything we possibly can to protect American lives. I think what you will see is a continued drawdown. We'll have a discussion about the nation building that's going on in Afghanistan and whether that is an appropriate use of taxpayer funds. But I think regardless of party affiliation, you will see a group of our warriors in that region for a long time to come to ensure that the different terrorist networks aren't able to repopulate, re-engage, and continue to wreak havoc like they were doing 10, 12 years ago.
Seems like the way you just laid out what it looks like on the ground over there, why can't those terrorists simply wait us out? I mean, is what you're suggesting that we're there indefinitely in order to keep that from happening?
Well, as you remember, when the president actually gave a timeline, there was a lot of discussion about that decision to give a timeline. This is why I don't think you give a timeline publicly, because of just this notion that terrorists will wait us out. And that has happened to a certain extent. You saw the reality on September 11th this year, where you had the consulate attacked, our ambassador and 3 other Americans killed. It's clear now that that was a terrorist attack, not what was originally thought, a video that decided to get people excited and focusing on killing Americans. You have to do 2 things. Number one, you've got to be informed. You've got to have the best intelligence possible, and you have to have a plan. You need to make sure that your enemy and your opponent understands that you're there to win. And I think providing a public timeline undermines that goal and objective.
Jeff Feingold is here from New Hampshire Business Review, one of our media partners. Jeff, your question.
Scott, Congressman, in your opening remarks, you mentioned how next year that no matter who's in office, who has power or not, there will be need for economic reform.
Yep.
What did you mean by economic reform?
Well, look, here we are almost 4 years into the president's first term. There were a series of initiatives that he put into place, partly during the time that he had total control from a party perspective. The House, the Senate, and the White House were one-party rule. He started with the stimulus, $810 billion. And the notion of, at the beginning, in the persuasion of passing that legislation, was we will have under 6% unemployment. We had 43 consecutive months of 8% or higher. This month was the first month where we actually fell below 8%. And there are a lot of people who are actually rejoicing that number. And I think it's a mistake. Because when you actually look at the number of 7.8%, it's for one reason and one reason only. We have the lowest labor participation rate in 30 years in this country. We had 114,000 jobs that were created in the month of September. That's actually pretty good for a state like the size of Texas. That is not good for the country. So, and the second problem is we have low bracket income earners, middle bracket income earners, and high income bracket income earners. We are seeing job growth in the first bracket, the lowest of the three. You are not seeing it in the middle and high. So that is a fundamental problem for the economy and for a growth model that you want to see in terms of commerce, in terms of consumer confidence. Secondly, when the administration originally for the second quarter of this year said our GDP growth was 1.7%, which is anemic, re-announced about 3 weeks ago that they adjusted it down to 1.3. 1.7 is terrible. 1.3 is beyond terrible. You cannot have any kind of long-term expectation of job creation, of higher income opportunities for everyone if you don't have that GDP number growing at about 4.5%. And then job creation on a monthly basis should be about 225,000 per month at minimum, up to about 275, maybe 300. If you see that consumer confidence returns, then you start to see markets change, and you start to see the opportunity of our economy grow. But the other challenge, Jeff, is this. We have, at the end of this year, all the tax rates are going to expire. There is no certainty right now in the country on whether some of them will be extended, all of them will be extended, some taxes go up, some stay the same. Job creators, small business owners that I just visited about 10 last week in different sectors, tell me the number one problem is lack of predictability, lack of knowing the rules of the game. So we've got to address that issue. And then I think you've got to get into not just extending the existing rates for everybody to give them certainty, but you do have to look at what is the tax code going to look like for the next 20 years. So we need reform in that area to give long-term predictability. You don't want to just extend rates and extend rates and extend rates without that long-term certainty. So that's why I believe the next Congress, there needs to be real reform relative to tax policy, relative to what the regulatory policy is going to be. There's got to be reform in healthcare policy as well.
I just want to make one other thing about the stimulus spending. It's always struck me that you know, a lot of criticism of the stimulus spending, the effectiveness of it. But could you explain from your perspective why is the United States economy in better shape than its Western industrialized counterparts in Europe, where austerity, the opposite of stimulus, was what was chosen? And as we know, the European economy is a complete mess right now. I mean, can you explain why that
Sure.
would be?
Well, first of all, we are the largest economy in the world. Secondly, the principles of our economy are far different than European nations and Western European nations. In Spain, for example, in France, you've got more than 50% of the people who are requiring or needing some sort of governmental assistance. We have a different foundational principle. You know, we feel here in America that if you need assistance, you're going to get that assistance for a short, reasonable, responsible period of time. But in terms of the absolute power of our economy, it is the largest economy in the world. It still is, when you compare us to other nations, the best place to invest and the best place to be. I mean, you're seeing right now China coming here and investing here, not just in our markets, but also in our property, because this still is the best bet in the world. But it doesn't mean because we happen to be slightly better than countries who are choosing austerity that by any means we're out of this mess. I think what we need is really, if you think about what's going to move our economy, we typically have, on average, of GDP, as a percentage of GDP, a 20% revenue number and a 20% expenditure. Right now, our expenditures are going up close to about 25%. It's a huge difference. And our revenues have been declining. They're somewhere around 16, 17%. So if you look at it on a sort of on a map, you're seeing the divide go like this. It's getting bigger and bigger, which is why you're seeing short-term deficits and you're seeing lots of more long-term debt. When your debt is a 1-to-1 ratio to your GDP, which is where we are now, $16 trillion of GDP, $16 trillion of debt. Nobody wants to be in that position. And I liken it to the balance sheet of a private sector or public sector entity. Let's just talk about a private sector entity. If you're looking to invest in a private sector entity and you see revenue at a certain number, but then you see your output and your debt at the same number, there's no way you would put your personal dollars as an investment into that entity. That's the challenge that we have here right now as America. Now, I was a mayor for 4 years. My job, in part, was to balance the budget, to administer the budget, regardless of whether it was the budget I wanted or the compromise budget or a budget that I was given by the Board of Aldermen. But the reality is my responsibility was to be a good steward on behalf of taxpayers. And what we ended up doing was cutting taxes. We cut our borrowing in half in my first year because I was concerned about our debt service payments at the time. And it was a small percentage of our overall budget, but we didn't borrow for operating expenses. The nation is borrowing for operating expenses, and any public, private, or nonprofit entity that gets to the point where they have to borrow for their operating expenses, that board of directors can say, wait a minute, this is a problem, we've got to change course. That's where I feel the budget for the federal government's at. We're borrowing 42 cents of every dollar for operating expenses. There doesn't seem to be, right now, the urgency for the changes that I think need to be made. And I think it's in part because you've got two different philosophies in Washington in terms of how to fix these challenges. And they're big issues, so you're not going to get people to agree immediately. It does take time. But the policies that the president put in place, when he specifically said, Jeff, that these policies are going to work, when you ask Americans today, have they worked? Forget about whether we like the president or dislike him. Just talk about whether the policy has worked. I'm not sure that a majority of Americans say, yes, the policies have worked. I think they're concerned. They're concerned not about their jobs, but about their careers. They're concerned about their families, their kids, their grandkids, and what direction this nation is taking.
Jake Berry is here, covering the congressional races for the Telegraph out of Nashville. Jake, welcome. Go ahead and fire off a question.
Congressman, Democratic candidates have spent much of this election celebrating what they consider the victories of the Affordable Care Act, allowing young adults up to age 26 to stay on their parents' plans, cover pre-existing conditions, others. Are there elements of the health care law that you would like to continue, and how would you see doing so, considering your support for review?
Well, thanks, Jake. It's no secret that I oppose the Affordable Care Act for a number of reasons. Number one, I didn't think it was constitutional. I disagree with the United States Supreme Court ultimate decision on the constitutionality of the bill. I do think they were right to say, based on the Commerce Clause, it's unconstitutional. And the reality, this came down to the definition of fee or tax. Most people probably don't realize that if you don't get health insurance, the federal government will tax you, according now to the United States Supreme Court, 1% in year one, next year, of your salary if you don't have health insurance. So I'm not sure how that helps someone with affordability problems. The goal that the president had were twofold. Number one, accessibility and affordability. If you look at the Kaiser study that was just released, where the president said our average family premium as a result of the Affordable Care Act will decline by $2,500. Kaiser Institute study shows that it's actually increased $2,300. That's just for the average family. Secondly, small business owners, job creators, the ones who are driving this economy, explicitly state their concerns about the regulatory requirements in this piece of legislation. say it's a hindrance. The NFIB members say it, the Chamber of Commerce members say it. I hear it when I travel around the state. Thirdly, of the 21 taxes in this bill, 12 are designed to affect people with incomes under $250,000. 12 of them. And the cost now, according to the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, as rescored after the State Supreme Court, United States Supreme Court decision, went up from $800 billion to $1.8 trillion. Nobody denies the need for affordability and accessibility. Those are goals that are important, and I think they're achievable goals. But I would approach it in a very different way. I think there's 2 or 3 things you can do right off the bat. First, there is no reason that we shouldn't be able to purchase health insurance anywhere in the country like we purchase homeowners insurance, life insurance, auto insurance. I mean, think right now, does anyone know where their auto insurance carrier is located? You think about your policy, you probably don't know. That doesn't matter to you. What matters to you is having the fundamental ability to have choices and options and go shop the business. But you don't think, well, gee, I wonder if they're in Topeka, Kansas, or Manchester, New Hampshire, or Henniker, New Hampshire. I mean, you don't. That's not where your head is. So the other side will say, well, that's not possible. You can't do it because insurance is largely regulated on the state level. So I called up our insurance commissioner, met with him down in Washington, and asked him specifically, can we do this? And the answer was simply yes. And it's very, very simple. When I was mayor, you have cooperative agreements with contiguous communities about the relationship for services rendered and services necessary. There's no reason that states can't do the same thing. Now, we have 1.3 million people here in the state of New Hampshire. If we just partnered with northern New England states, Massachusetts, Vermont, Maine, New Hampshire, put those states into a cooperative agreement. Now we have an opportunity of many millions more people where you can invite carriers back in to try to fight for our business, to compete for our business. That competition, number one, will decline. We'll see a decline in rates. And the example that I saw was when I visited T Enterprises up in Guinta, a small company, tool and die company, 37 employees. The owner, Carl Thibodeau, showed me an actual plan, his plan. He showed me a plan that he actually wanted to buy from Arizona, identical. $50 per month per employee cheaper on the employee side and the employer side. That's real money, particularly to a small business owner, 37 people. When he's in a decline economy, he's seeing his revenues decline. He doesn't want to get rid of employees. Family business, people have known each other for years. He does not want to see people unemployed, doesn't want to see people laid off. So he's looking for every possible means to reduce the expense side of the equation. And that alone would have been pretty significant. He can't do it because of the law. So that's one thing I think we need to be doing immediately. Secondly, when you go to see a physician, you'll likely go through a battery of tests. And it's because of the concern that a physician has about being sued. And if you have a close relationship with your physician, ask him or her. Just ask him the amount of time they will spend on ensuring that they're not going to be in a position to get sued. Think about how many times a day that happens in one community, let alone the state and the country. How many dollars go into protecting the likelihood of a suit. So I think you need reasonable, rational, responsible tort reform. Third, the most important thing, consumers are not in charge. Here's what I mean by that. When you go to get an MRI, you have no idea what the cost is. You can't shop it. You have no idea that you get a prescription. They tell you to go to an MRI center. The bill is the bill. You have insurance coverage that goes to the carrier. You might get an EOB, an explanation of benefits. You might have to pay a certain portion. That is a fundamental problem. It's the only thing in this country that we don't know the price as we're purchasing. You you go grocery shopping, when you go buy a car, when you go buy a computer, you go buy a phone, you can shop. You can say, how many people have sat in a store, look at the price of the computer, and call down to the to a competitor down the street? I've done it. I sat in Staples, called Best Buy, looking for price competition because I want to see what the best price is. We can't do that in insurance. So my last year as mayor, here's one of the things that I implemented. We had 17 unions in the city that I had to deal with. We didn't legislate it, but what I did do was offer it on a volunteer basis to the employees and to the union heads. If we give you the prices from all the medical providers for the top 25 to 35 different medical procedures, if you choose the most expensive, you're entitled to do that, no problem. But if you choose the least expensive, you will get a portion of the savings in the view of a check because of that savings amount. The first week we saved $40,000. So now what happens? Individuals, employees are starting to take ownership because they see the reality of the cost associated with their premium and what they can drive in terms of cost reduction. So now the state of New Hampshire has started doing this. Many people probably don't even realize it on a pilot program basis for the state employees. They're saving on average about $100,000 a month. Just because we gave people information, not legislation, not a mandate, but choice, options, education, and information. From where we stand right now, you can draw a circle, 10, 12 mile radius on where we stand right now. You can find an MRI for $600, you can find an MRI for $1,600, but you don't know the cost. The Affordable Care Act doesn't address that driver. What it does is requires a top-down from the federal government mandate on insurance and on care. And I don't think that that's the model that ultimately will work, particularly because I think it does put the federal government in the decision-making process between you and your physician. I don't think that that's what we want. Healthcare is very personal, depending on the ailment. It is a very private, personal decision. And I don't think you want a scenario where you got to go get the okay of the federal government when you want to make decisions about your health care.
Most of the measures that you mentioned have to do with affordability. Are there any provisions in the law relating to accessibility and coverage that you would be sorry to lose?
I think the accessibility model is the community health centers that I think we need to be expanding. As a mayor, I saw it firsthand. The challenge is to get people care and have proactive and preventative care. So, and it doesn't matter if it's rural or if it's urban, but in our state's largest city, we are expanding the community health center model. You pay on a sliding scale. Some people will pay nothing if they can't afford or if they don't have the financial resources. But based on your income levels, you have basic care. And that every study will show that if you have prevention and if you are preventative, instead of dealing with an ailment post-identified, you will have a higher likelihood of reducing cost and improving your quality of life. So, and the federal government does play a role in a portion of the funding of community health centers. And we have them all around the state, but they are the lowest cost on a per patient percentage. It's the lowest cost option, the most effective option in the country. And that needs to be part of the model in terms of accessibility.
Congressman, I have a question for you. First term, you have young children, your son Jack, your daughter Colby. Most of us in this room have a commute that's like 20 minutes. Yours involves hopping a flight from WY every week. How do you and your wife balance your needs to serve your constituents with the needs to take care of your young family? How do you do it?
Well, I feel very fortunate. I mean, I love serving people. I've done it for the last 10 years of my life. And it takes a toll on your family. It really does. You've got to have a willing participant, a willing partner who appreciates what your goals are, what your objectives are. So, you know, here's what we do. I mean, I fly usually down to DC on a Monday, and we usually, the session week is about 4 days. Your first vote is the night that you get to Washington. And then, so I'll spend half the morning in New Hampshire and then the other half in Washington. And then I'll be there for Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night. And your hope is that you can get on a flight early enough on Thursday after the votes are done to get home, and in my case, in time to pick up the kids from school. And in their minds, you know, I wasn't gone as long as I really was, because they saw me on Monday and they're seeing me on Thursday before they go to bed. Those weeks are good. I mean, I miss the kids. My daughter will call me now religiously every Thursday or Friday that I'm traveling home around 6:30 in the morning and ask, what's your schedule? What flight are you getting on? What time? And I made the mistake of saying, oh yeah, I'll be home at 4:30. Right? And then the day legislatively changes, and then you have to make that painful phone call saying, I'm sorry, I'm not coming home. But we make it work. You know, my wife does a great job of being a good mom and realizing that this is a personal passion, but it's important for the country to elect the right individuals. And you know, she has often said to me, so long as you feel like you're doing the right thing, continue doing what you do. And so long as you feel like you're moving the ball, and that you're improving, you know, in the case of when I was mayor of the city, in this case the country, keep doing what you do. And it's nice to have that kind of support network.
Sure, thanks. Congressman, a major aspect of political campaigns these days, not just in your race, but all over the state and all over the country, are television ads, internet ads, produced and funded not by the candidates themselves, but by third-party organizations.
I've never seen one of them.
They don't paint you in a flattering light, they don't paint your opponent in a flattering light. I'm wondering what your role is, what your view is of the Supreme Court's Citizen United ruling on campaign funding, and what do you think the proper role of corporations and unions in American elections should be?
Well, this is probably, outside of the economy and jobs, this is what I hear about the most. And everybody says, everyone says, I'm sick of it. You know, we're in a battleground state. We are in a state where the undeclareds are a higher percentage of either registered Republicans or registered Democrats. And I think for the foreseeable future, we're always going to be, because we're an engaged state, the First Nation in the primary. We have I think, a pretty informed electorate and an engaged electorate. But our electorate, too, gets frustrated with the negativity and tone and tenor. The reality is that the United States Supreme Court said that there is a First Amendment right to do so. Whether I like it or not, it's here to stay. And it is frustrating at times because you have an outside group that has an ad. Here's the greatest, an interesting example. First of all, the campaign cannot speak with an outside group. So you have no idea, there is no ability to speak with them, to guide what they're going to say. You have no, by law, you cannot. So think about it from this perspective. Say you're running what you think is a good campaign, an effective campaign, a smart campaign, a positive campaign, and in comes an outside group and has a negative ad on your opponent, and it reflects poorly on you as the candidate. Because how many people have time to, you know, read the small fine print at the bottom of the screen at the end of the 30-second ad? And you're probably seeing right now on WMUR between 5 and 6:30, you're probably seeing somewhere in the vicinity of 30 to 40 ads in 90 minutes. It's amazing that there's any news actually programmed in that hour and a half. So people don't realize if it's the candidate, if it's an outside group, if it's a national party or not. So it can actually have a poor reflection on you as a candidate. I personally don't like it. It's a First Amendment right, and I think it's here to stay. I think what you can control is how you run your campaigns and what you advertise. And in my case, it's a general rule that I've always applied. I will not attack someone, but I will respond to a claim that is made. Because I don't, you can't not. The reality is there's a percentage of people who believe what they see on TV and internet. So I'm very careful to that, again, in response, and that's what I've done in this campaign. You know, the first ad that came out from my opponent was an ad about veterans. You know, she served 2 terms. She was on the Armed Services Committee. She's proud of her work as for veterans. I applaud that. You know, we here in New Hampshire have a high percentage of veterans that live in the state. And I think regardless of party affiliation, we are very tuned to veterans' needs. And we should. People who, you know, put their life on the line, I don't feel should have to beg for certain benefits that they've earned. I think most of us, you know, feel that way. But the end of the ad, so it talks favorably about the things that she's done. And then it goes into the final 15 seconds or so of the ad that says, alleges that I cut billions from veterans. And you have to, by law, have a citation. So one of the citations is HR 2055, and I want to walk people through it and give you sort of the history of how an ad is written, how it's placed, and how it ends up coming off the air in this circumstance. HR 2055 was a bill for Veterans Administration that we passed with increased funding of $8 million over the previous year. The claim in the ad was that I cut billions from veterans funding. So we have procedural votes called MTRs, motions to recommit. Whoever the minority party is will bring motions to recommit to the floor. I think it's actually a terrible thing to do because it politicizes every single vote. And I don't think you should use the floor of the House for political purposes. But to be honest, both sides have done this when they're in the minority. So the motion to recommit basically says, well, we don't think this bill has enough funding. We want to send it back to committee for more funding. And by the way, apple pie is wonderful and baseball is great. And if you vote against this, you're a terrible person. So you dispense with that procedural motion, and the regular motion comes back. The regular bill comes back to the floor. So this bill, HR 2055, funding veterans, passed 411-5. Not one Democrat voted against the bill in the House. It was voted by the Senate and signed into law by the President. An example of bipartisanship that we hear never happens. That piece of legislation is the legislation that's used in an attack ad saying that I cut veterans' benefits. So it's wrong. It's not accurate. But when you travel around the state, people will say, did you cut veterans' benefits? So there are a group of veterans that had a press conference stating that they didn't like the ad, they thought it was false. So a week and a half later, at the WBIN committee, which was about a week ago, one of the questions from the panel came up about that specific ad. And I walked everyone through the ad, and I looked at my opponent, and I said, knowing that it passed 411-5, knowing that the Senate passed it, knowing that the President signed it into law, and called it a good bill, a good bipartisan bill for veterans, would you have been the only Democrat on the House of Representatives to vote against the bill? She didn't want to answer the question. So, you know, I kept on it. And she finally said, yes, I would have voted for the bill. So in a debate, I got her to admit that the bill she's attacking me for is a bill she would have voted for. Now that's not fair, it's not honest, but now the ad is no longer running.
Congressman, one of the first things you said in your answer is that you're not happy with the situation with these third-party ads, but that's where we stand in the Supreme Court. Did the Supreme Court get it wrong?
Well, I wouldn't think so highly to decide, you know, whether the Supreme Court made a decision that was wrong or right. I mean, there are decisions that I agree with, there are decisions I disagree with. They feel, in their analysis, that the First Amendment right applies to political advertising. So I think in political advertising, no matter what law is passed, there's going to be groups that find a way to raise money and put ads on TV. I mean, it's happened ever since the advent of TV, and I think it's going to continue to happen so long as that medium is an effective medium to speak to your constituents. So it's part of politics that probably all candidates don't care for. Look, it's not easy when you hear an ad that says you're a terrible person. Most people who are in Congress, Republicans and Democrats, they're all good people. You know, these are people who work hard, who have a belief system. And, you know, I often say, like, once the country makes its decision, who the president is, who the House of Representatives members are, who the senators are, we have a fundamental obligation to govern. And that's something that's lacking, missing right now in this country because of tone, because of tenor. So somehow the elected leaders have to rise above that tone and tenor, understanding that there will be these negative acts, and somehow demonstrate that in their heart of hearts, what's most important is the reflection that you are of the people you represent. And I often say, so people are not going to agree with me on every single issue, but I'll tell you what people do get. They have the ability to access me personally as their representative. People need to remember, I look at my job as your representative. That means I'm home. I speak with and to individuals. I allow everyone the opportunity to come influence the things that I'm going to vote on. Because at the end of the day, the term representative means you're supposed to have a reflection of the individuals that you represent. And I think when people, as they get to know you more, they say, well, this candidate or that candidate, I know that person. And I know what's on TV is wrong. Or that's not the relationship that I have with that individual. So you hope really to, you try to control what you can control. And what I can control is how I run the office that I hold and how I allow that office to be utilized in a positive way for my constituents.
Congressman, unfortunately, we are already out of our time for the questions. I wanted to give you just a couple minutes to offer any type of closing thought for this morning.
Yeah, well, thank you all for being here and participating. You know, this is the second time I've participated in New England College debate. I very much appreciate it. Here's what I hope that you all do. Number one, I want you to vote. You know, people think sometimes that their vote doesn't matter. John F. Kennedy, when he ran for president, he won by one vote in every precinct in the country, 100,000 votes. Your vote matters. Now, if you're in the first CD, I hope you vote for me. That's why I'm here. November 6th, I want you to vote for me. But the most important thing is for us to exercise our responsibility to move the nation in the direction we feel is most appropriate. And what you'll get out of me is a responsive, active representative who will listen to your particular needs. I feel very passionately about getting this economy in the right direction, focusing on the opportunity for jobs and careers. And regardless of where we are in life, whether we're in college, or whether we've got a family, or whether we're retiring, that matters. When you have almost 50% of people coming out of college without the opportunity to have a job inside of 1 year, that's a problem. That's a problem. That's what's going on right now in our country. And the most important thing I think we do, we elect someone, is to make sure that they are going to advocate for us, and they are going to be a responsible legislator. And I feel that with, you know, the focus that I've had legislatively and the focus that I've had here in New Hampshire, particularly hosting job fairs, making sure that people have accessibility to my office, that I've demonstrated the opportunity to serve a second term, asking certainly people for that opportunity, and will serve the way I think you would like someone to serve from the 1st Congressional District. I want to thank again the panel and you, Scott, and the college for hosting this forum. Thank you very much.